At 1:43 a.m. on July 30th, 2025, the skies above Ukraine were torn apart. Not by thunder, but by the roar of war. This wasn't just another attack. It was a ruthless surprise assault that shattered any sense of security. In a meticulously coordinated strike, 320 Russian drones and 8 cruise missiles entered Ukrainian airspace from multiple directions, catching everyone off guard. Within moments, the city of Kherson, once a symbol of resilience, lay in ruins. The destruction was catastrophic. 32 innocent civilians were killed in an instant. 14 others were left severely injured, their lives forever altered. A school, a church, a hospital, all symbols of hope, were reduced to rubble under the darkness of night. This wasn't just an attack on infrastructure. It was a direct hit to the heart of the Ukrainian people. But Ukraine's response came faster and more forceful than anyone could have predicted. Just 72 hours later, Ukraine struck back, not with billions of dollars worth of advanced weaponry, but with 270 homemade UAVs crafted from scrap parts, GPS trackers, and recycled explosives. These weren't just drones, they were a statement. Ukraine didn't just retaliate, they humiliated their adversaries. How did these DIY drones manage to evade detection by Russian forces? Can a weapon that costs only a few $1,000s destroy a target worth millions? What happened next would leave the world in shock and awe. The night of July 30th, 2025 had already shaken the skies with Russian missiles and drones raining down over Ukraine. For 12 long minutes, Ukrainian radar stations scrambled to intercept the incoming assault. Despite an impressive effort, 61 drones intercepted by air defenses, the assault wasn't stopped. 16 UAVs and 6 cruise missiles broke through the defenses, striking 8 locations across the country. The worst of it came in Kherson, a city already struggling to recover, now facing the horror of an unprovoked attack. Explosions rocked key civilian targets: a school, a church, a residential block, and a field hospital. A medical tent where children and medics sought refuge was directly hit, trapping them in flames. The death toll climbed rapidly. 32 civilians lost their lives instantly. 14 others suffered severe injuries, many of them burned or maimed by shrapnel. None of the victims were soldiers, none of them were combatants. They were ordinary people who had become targets of a cold, calculated assault. The aim wasn't military advantage, it was to break the spirit of the nation. Witnesses described the attack as a storm of metal, a relentless barrage that turned their world into chaos. Rescue workers worked tirelessly, digging through the rubble with their bare hands, guided only by the dim light of their phones. The air was filled with sirens, screams, and the haunting sound of destruction. It was the kind of attack that left everyone gasping for air, wondering how something so brutal could happen to people who had done nothing but live their lives. In the wake of the devastation, President Volodymyr Zelensky, upon hearing the full extent of the damage, was said to have stared silently at the floor for nearly a minute. Then, in a voice heavy with grief and determination, he uttered just one word: enough. But this was not just an attack, it was a message written in fire and steel, aimed at the core of Ukraine's spirit. It wasn't about military targets or battlefield tactics. Russia had gone after the people, the civilians. And as the smoke from Kherson's ruins rose into the night sky, one question echoed in the heart of Kiev. How do you avenge 32 innocent lives? When civilians are the target, there's no room for rules, only revenge. The world watched in silence. Some countries pledged support for Ukraine, both materially and morally. U.S. General Marcus Thorne was quoted saying, "We will support Ukraine both materially and morally." The message was clear. This would not go unanswered. The world would stand behind Ukraine. But Ukraine wasn't waiting for international aid. They had already made their decision. They would strike back with what they had: ingenuity, desperation, and a deep-rooted will to survive. At 5:10 a.m., just hours after the attack, President Zelensky called for an emergency meeting. This wasn't going to be a meeting of speeches and promises. No, this was about action. There were no grandiose plans or promises of NATO intervention. Zelensky and his team gathered around a table inside a secure military bunker. The walls were heavy with the weight of loss, but they were also filled with the sense of urgency that only a country under siege could feel. The briefing was grim: satellite images, casualty reports. It was a long, silent moment as the reality of the situation sunk in. But when it was over, Zelensky stood up, his resolve hardening. "They think we are weak. Let us show them what desperation can do." The response would come not from the usual arsenal of expensive missiles, stealth bombers, or high-tech NATO weapons. Number Ukraine was going to fight back with the tools they had. And what they had was innovation. In just 3 days, Ukraine had crafted 270 homemade UAVs. These weren't high-tech, multi-million-dollar drones. These were basic, low-cost flying machines made from spare parts. Motors from commercial drones, GPS systems, dash cameras, and recycled explosives. They cost a fraction of what Russian missiles cost. But their potential was immense. Ukraine's target? A symbol of Russian pride and military infrastructure. The Sochi oil depot. A crucial fuel hub that supplied Russian tanks and armored units along the southern front. The mission was clear. This wasn't just about retaliation. This was about hitting Russia where it hurt, where it mattered. But the most shocking part, these drones were not stealthy military tech from NATO. They were homemade, crude, but highly effective weapons built out of necessity. In just a matter of days, Ukraine had crafted a response that could shake the Russian military to its core. At 3:10 a.m. on August 2, 2025, while most of Sochi slept under the faint glow of security floodlights, a new threat emerged, one that Russia had never seen coming. 270 homemade Ukrainian UAVs, crafted from scrap materials but lethal in design, crossed into Russian airspace at low altitude, dodging radar coverage and exploiting gaps in electronic defenses. These weren't NATO drones. They weren't high-tech machines built by defense contractors. They were weapons forged from the desperation and ingenuity of a nation under siege. These drones weren't sophisticated, but they didn't need to be. Their strength lay in numbers, in their ability to blend in with the night, to surprise and overwhelm. Their target, the Sochi oil depot, one of Russia's most strategic military assets. This massive fueling station, nestled in the heart of the southern front, was vital to sustaining Russia's tank and armored divisions. A direct hit here could cripple Russian operations in the region. The world had witnessed Ukraine's resilience before, but this was on a different level. It was the kind of strike that no one thought was possible. Homemade drones built from basic parts, motors scavenged from recreational drones, cameras from dash cams, GPS chips pulled from smartphones, and explosives recycled from deactivated artillery shells. Each drone cost less than $600 to make, but the devastation they were about to cause would be worth millions. By 3:12 a.m., the first drone struck. It hit Tank 14C at the Sochi oil depot, a 280,000-barrel fuel tank. The explosion was instantaneous, lighting up the coastline like a sunrise. But that was just the beginning. Within seconds, secondary explosions erupted as nearby fuel lines ignited. The flames shot high into the sky, creating a fiery spectacle that could be seen from miles away. The shockwave from the blast shattered windows across a 2-mile radius, and the ground trembled as the inferno spread. Russian troops, caught completely off guard, scrambled for cover. Some soldiers were barefoot, others still trying to rescue their burning comrades from the wreckage. The depot, once a symbol of Russia's military might, was now a smoldering ruin, its massive fuel reserves fueling the flames that threatened to consume everything in sight. But Ukraine's drones didn't stop there. A second wave of UAVs followed, hitting fuel trucks, pumping stations, and a tank servicing yard where 12 T-90 Russian tanks were lined up, ready to be refueled. The destruction was overwhelming. Multiple vehicles exploded on impact, sending steel fragments and shrapnel flying through the air like a giant grenade had detonated in the middle of the yard. By 3:19 a.m., Russian communications with the depot had gone silent. Emergency flares shot into the sky, but no reinforcements were coming. Russian firefighters arrived at 3:43 a.m., only to find that the flames were too massive to contain. The smoke from the burning depot billowed high into the sky, rising over 500 feet, visible to satellites passing overhead. The damage was catastrophic. More than 60% of the depot was destroyed, along with tens of millions of dollars worth of fuel. Dozens of military personnel were either killed or severely burned. Russia's ability to conduct tactical refueling in the southern region was paralyzed for days, leaving its forces stranded and vulnerable. But it wasn't just the destruction of fuel and military assets that made this strike so significant. It was the message it sent to the world, and to Russia in particular. Ukraine had struck where it hurt most. The attack on the Sochi oil depot wasn't just a retaliation for the massacre in Kherson. It was a symbol of defiance, a statement that even with limited resources, Ukraine was a force to be reckoned with. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a humiliating blow to Russia's pride. For all of Russia's technological superiority and vast arsenal, it had been humbled by a small group of determined individuals using the most basic of tools. In the hours following the attack, satellite imagery confirmed the scale of the destruction. 4 major fuel tanks had been reduced to molten metal, and the remains of T-90 tanks were scattered across a vast blackened crater. Russian state media remained silent, refusing to acknowledge the extent of the disaster. There were no images, no casualty reports, and no comment from the Kremlin. But the silence spoke volumes. On the global stage, however, the response was swift. Within hours, high-resolution images of the destruction leaked from European defense analysts, sparking international headlines. Sochi burns, declared Germany's Der Spiegel. Ukraine hits Russia where it hurts, wrote the Times of London. The world had taken notice and Russia's embarrassment was complete. But the impact didn't stop there. Financial markets reacted immediately. Global crude oil prices surged by 7.9%, the sharpest single-day spike since the 2022 refinery bombings in the Middle East. Brent crude crossed the $110 mark per barrel, while European fuel futures jumped by 12% overnight. Energy regulators began to issue warnings about the potential impact on global supply chains. In Brussels, NATO convened an emergency intelligence session. Though private applause for Ukraine's bold move echoed across several allied capitals, no official statement was made. The strike, though undeniably effective, had walked a fine line between wartime necessity and diplomatic sensitivity. Ukraine had acted on its own terms without waiting for NATO approval, and that sent a powerful message to both Russia and its allies. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian government remained resolute. A stern-faced official from Ukraine's Security Council issued a statement. "We do not target civilians, but if Russia insists on burning our homes and hospitals, we will burn their fuel." The world had witnessed the dawn of a new form of warfare, one that rejected the traditional notion of military might in favor of a more creative, resourceful approach. Military analysts called the attack a textbook example of asymmetric warfare. A $150,000 strike, utilizing 270 low-cost drones, had caused an estimated $320 million in damage to Russia's critical infrastructure, while also crippling Russian military logistics in the region for days. Ukraine's ingenuity had proven more effective than Russia's high-tech missile systems. For Russia, the ramifications were far-reaching. The Sochi strike had exposed a vulnerability that no one had seen coming. The once secure oil depot was now a symbol of Russia's overconfidence, a reminder that no target is truly out of reach in the modern age of warfare. In the aftermath of the Sochi attack, Russia faced an unprecedented level of chaos and confusion. The strike had not only crippled a critical military infrastructure, but had also shattered Russia's sense of invulnerability. Sochi, a key area tucked between the Black Sea and the Caucasus, was considered safe from the war's front lines. But now it had become the epicenter of humiliation for the Russian military. The strategic importance of the Sochi oil depot, one of Russia's largest fuel reserves, couldn't be overstated. It was responsible for feeding Russian armored units, fueling tanks, and supporting military operations along the southern front. To lose such a vital asset in the blink of an eye by homemade drones that cost mere pennies in comparison to the multi-million-dollar missile systems Russia had invested in was nothing short of a disaster. While Russia's state media kept its lips sealed, the damage was already too great to hide. The scale of destruction was far too visible for even the Kremlin to deny. The explosion of the fuel depot, the shattering of T-90 tanks, and the massive fireball that engulfed the facility left nothing to the imagination. By the time Russian forces mobilized, it was too late. The damage had been done. In response to the strike, Russia scrambled to find answers. Senior military commanders were dispatched to assess the situation, but their efforts were stymied by the sheer scale of the disaster. At the same time, emergency measures were put in place to relocate fuel and ammunition stockpiles to safer underground locations. An operation expected to take at least a week. This logistical nightmare, coupled with the loss of crucial resources, would have far-reaching consequences on Russia's ability to fight. As Ukraine watched the aftermath unfold, a new sense of morale surged through its ranks. What had been a desperate act of survival just days before had now become a symbol of victory. Ukraine, a nation struggling against overwhelming odds, had struck a blow that echoed far beyond the battlefield. In Kyiv, officials proudly declared, "We may bleed, but we are not powerless." The message was clear. Despite Russia's overwhelming technological superiority, Ukraine had fought back with creativity, determination, and resourcefulness. It wasn't just the military capabilities that mattered anymore. It was the will to resist, to adapt, and to find strength in the face of adversity. The Sochi attack marked a turning point in the war, one that would redefine the rules of modern conflict. It was no longer just about high-tech weaponry and massive military budgets. The age of asymmetric warfare had arrived, where ingenuity and resourcefulness could turn the tide of war. For Ukraine, this victory wasn't just a military achievement. It was a testament to the power of the underdog, the power of survival. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was forced to confront a new reality. Military analysts across the globe began to reconsider their strategies. The Sochi strike demonstrated the potential of low-cost, highly effective weapons, capable of bypassing even the most advanced air defense systems. And this wasn't just a one-time fluke. This was a new kind of warfare, where grassroots innovation could take down even the most formidable opponents. But as the world began to digest the implications of Ukraine's audacious strike, Russia's response was still unclear. Despite the immense damage, Moscow had yet to make a public statement. Behind closed doors, however, military officials were undoubtedly reeling from the shock of what had just transpired. The attack had sent a clear message. No target was too far out of reach, no matter how secure it seemed. The silence from the Kremlin was deafening, but it spoke volumes. Russia had been caught off guard, and it would take time for them to fully recover from the psychological and logistical blow dealt by Ukraine. For the first time in the war, the Russian military was forced to reckon with the fact that even its most protected assets were vulnerable, and that realization would continue to haunt them in the months to come. As global markets reacted to the strike, the impact of the Sochi attack rippled far beyond the battlefield. Energy prices soared, and financial analysts scrambled to adjust their forecasts. The geopolitical consequences were equally profound. The message was now loud and clear: Ukraine was not to be underestimated. The global balance of power had shifted, and the world was watching to see how Russia would respond. In Ukraine, however, the mood was one of quiet determination. President Zelensky, in a brief televised address, stated, "We did not start this war, but we will choose how it ends. And we will choose it on our terms." It was a message not just to Russia, but to the world. Ukraine was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for justice, for their right to exist, and for their place in the international community. The Sochi strike wasn't just about destroying fuel tanks or military assets. It was a declaration of Ukraine's resilience, an affirmation that even the smallest and most seemingly insignificant forces could change the course of history. It was a battle fought with a mixture of anger, ingenuity, and hope. Hope that the world would see Ukraine's struggle for what it truly was. In the days following the attack, military strategists from all over the world began to rethink their approach to modern warfare. The success of Ukraine's homemade drones had revealed a new kind of weapon. A weapon built not in factories or military bases, but in basements and garages, using everyday materials and a deep sense of necessity. The battle for the future of warfare had just begun, and it was clear that Ukraine's ingenuity had opened a new chapter in the history of global conflict. As the smoke from Sochi began to clear, one thing was certain: Ukraine had changed the rules of war forever.